Welcome back to Proxy Hammer, everybody. And today we're going to be looking at a unit that has probably not gotten a whole lot of love since the Codex came out. And of course, I'm talking about my favorite unit of all time, the Storm Guardians. Of course, I'm being ironic. I actually dislike Storm Guardians very much. I kind of always have. I've always thought they were a weak unit in general, and even more so now. But what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be analyzing Storm Guardians and taking a look at why nobody takes them. Now, there's a lot of reasons why, right? And most of them are obvious to a lot of players, especially veteran Eldar players. But what at its core is the reason no one takes Storm Guardians? Because of course there's plenty of bad units throughout the Codex, right, that aren't optimal. But Storm Guardians just seem to hit every single check mark of what it takes to be an ineffective unit. And I don't think the problem with Storm Guardians lies in their stats necessarily. I don't think it necessarily lies in their points cost or anything like that. I don't think they're overcosted. I think that Storm Guardians have a much deeper issue. An issue that goes beyond stats and points costs. For example, Dark Reapers are not a good unit. But they work, or I should say, would work pretty well if they just had slightly buffed weapons and slightly lower points costs, right? But the problem with Storm Guardians is, even if you rationalize the point cost or their damage or their weapons or whatever, they still wouldn't be that great of a unit. So why is that? So we're going to take a deep dive into that and find out the real root of the problem with Storm Guardians. So we're going to, just like every unit video, we're going to look at the stats, weapons, and special rules of Storm Guardians, reintroduce ourselves to what the Storm Guardians can do. We're going to look at their strengths and weaknesses, of which they have many, many weaknesses. And we're going to also talk about the main issue with Storm Guardians, the deep centered issue, and why they don't seem to fit anywhere within any Craftworld army. So, if you look at the base stat of a Storm Guardian, they have decent stats overall, pretty good weapon skill, decent ballistic skill, squishy space elf toughness and strength, 1 wound, which is typical of Eldar, only 1 attack though. And I think that's where players start to kind of tune out of these guys, because only 1 attack on a close combat-oriented unit? It just seems like you're starting off on a very bad foot with these guys. But if you really think about it, you can kind of field 2 Storm Guardians for every combat aspect warrior anyway. Even though combat aspect warriors have much higher damage and much better abilities, you can kind of see that maybe having 2 Storm Guardians wouldn't be that bad. They do have objectives secured and things like that, right? So the 1 attack may not be that big of a deal. They do have lower leadership, but it doesn't often matter that much. And oftentimes, if you're losing most of your Storm Guardian unit, they're probably going to fail their leadership check anyway. Which, Guardian units do have leadership issues, which is one of their weaknesses. Now, if we look at their special weapons, they have quite a few special weapon options. The first one is the Flamer. Now, the Flamer is a pretty good weapon. It's 5 points, but the attack's auto hit and it's assault D6, which is a fairly decent weapon at dealing with infantry. They also have the option to take a Power Sword. Now, the reason why I don't like the Power Sword is because Storm Guardians only have 1 attack apiece. They don't have multiple attacks. They don't have ways of really gaining more attacks if you take the Power Sword. So, to be honest with you, the Power Sword just seems like a pretty lame option to me. The AP is only a couple more. You get 1+ strength, but you lose out on an extra attack over the Guardian Close Combat Weapon, which is their basic weapon option. Now, it is a very weak weapon, but it does give +1 attack, which is a little bit decent. And then we have the Guardian Fusion Gun, which is a 10-point upgrade, and it essentially gives the Guardian a fusion weapon. Now, the fusion gun is pretty decent. It's range 12, assault 1, strength 8, AP -4, and D6 damage. It's pretty good for frying tougher models, and can also do decent damage to more threatening targets like monsters and vehicles up close, especially when within 6 inches of them. Which, to be honest with you, isn't that bad considering this is a combat unit, and this unit will most often be used to throw into other units in an effort to tie them up in close combat and make them a little bit less effective at killing your aspect warriors and things like that might be a little bit more precious. They also come with plasma grenades and shuriken pistols. Shuriken pistols, of course, are a pretty decent pistol with the shuriken ability, which allows them to get extra AP if they roll 6 to wound. It's a standard weapon for close combat oriented units. And the plasma grenade also isn't that bad on this unit because they often will be within a close range by the time they shoot. So having a nice grenade D6 isn't always that bad. It's a pretty decent weapon in some cases. Now here's where the unit gets a little bit interesting and where I think there's a little bit of room for potential, right? Now the unit can actually take up to 4 special weapons per 10 models. So it can take 2 fusion guns and 2 flamers for every 10 models in the unit. You don't have to choose either or. So they get more special weapons over traditional units. For example, like tactical marine squads and stuff like that would only normally get 1 special weapon or 2 special weapons and a heavy weapon. But Storm Guardians get to have 4 of these. 2 Guardian fusion guns and 2 flamers. They can also have 2 power swords, but they're probably not worth taking, to be honest. Again, I just think that the power swords are not a useful upgrade on these guys, as their combat ability is just so bad that the power swords rarely do anything. And in my opinion, it's just a waste of points. You might as well give the unit 2 flamers for that same cost. They can also take the Serpent Shield, or Serpent Platform, I should say, the Serpent Scale Platform for 20 points. It gives the unit a 5+ invul save versus shooting, and rolls of 1 and 2 to wound them always fail when using ranged weapons. Now this is a pretty good option. It does cost a little bit. It costs pretty much almost the same as 2 Storm Guardians, which honestly makes sense because, it does give the unit a 5+ invul save. However, it does make the unit more expensive. And at that point, you're paying a lot of extra points for just a 5+ invul save at ranged. It doesn't have any benefit in close combat, and this unit is most likely going to want to be in close combat most of the time, just because its ranged capabilities aren't that spectacular. Now, the Guardian platform, the Serpent Scale platform, does have the crude platform ability, and basically this just means that it doesn't count as a model for morale purposes if destroyed, and because the Serpent Scale platform cannot shoot, it doesn't really take too much out of it to have this ability. I don't think it's not really a benefit, but it's not a hindrance either, which is a little bit nice. And then Storm Guardians also have the Stormblades ability, which means they get to reroll 1s when fighting enemy units that are within range of an objective. So this is a decent ability and allows them to be a little bit more efficient when fighting enemy units on objectives, but it's nothing to write home about, and it won't happen every single turn. And honestly, sometimes it can be a little hard to pull off, because even if the enemy's around the objective, if they're not within range of it, it doesn't work. And they also have the Guardian keyword, so they can benefit from all the Guardian-based abilities and stratagems, like Martial Citizenry. I think it's called Martial Citizenry, I believe. And also the Black Guardians stratagem if they come from Craftworld Uthway. Now, when looking at the strengths and weaknesses of this unit, it's clear to see that these guys have a lot of weaknesses. So let's go over their strengths first, just to be a little bit fair. They do have objective secured, which is very nice at securing objectives. They have rerolls of 1 when fighting enemies on objectives. They can take a lot of special weapons, and this is really where I think they have the potential to be something pretty effective. And they're also fairly cheap at 8 points a model, which is the cheapest in the codex. However, their weaknesses are why a lot of people don't take them. And really, we don't have a long list of weaknesses here, but the weaknesses are so devastating that a lot of people just don't want to put the energy and points into making this unit viable. So they really do need a lot of support to get into combat. They either need to be in reserves, which costs command points, or they need to be in a transport of some sort to ensure they make it. Because if they don't have that, they will be shot to pieces before they can even make it. In addition to that, they have a really bad combination of low damage in melee. They're really not good in melee combat. They have really low damage, and in fact, they do a little bit more damage, believe it or not, if they have special weapons at range. So if you have 4 special weapons in this unit is actually going to do more damage against most enemy types than they can in close combat. They're also extremely fragile, and because of that, they're easy to kill in close combat as well. So despite all those things, I think that when you take away the points cost, when you take away the damage potential and all that stuff, I think Storm Guardians have a bigger issue than all that. And why don't Storm Guardians make it into more lists, right? Why don't they seem to really fit in anywhere? Whenever you talk about good units or units that have synergy with each other, Storm Guardians never have any of it. And Storm Guardians never come up as part of that conversation because the fact is they don't really have synergy with any other unit in the Codex. And they are really a unit that has no specialization in an army of specialists. And any veteran Craftworld Eldar player will tell you, the Craftworld Eldar army is an army comprised completely of specialist units who excel at a couple of different tasks, but aren't so good in other areas. So for example, if you take a unit of fire dragons, right? Fire dragons are exceptional at killing monsters and vehicles. However, anything outside of that range, they're severely disadvantaged against, right? They will downtrade against every other type of unit pretty much in the entire game, with the exception of big stuff like Terminators and Centurions and things like that, which they will do decent against as well. But again, Fire Dragons, very specialized unit. Howling Banshees are also a very specialized unit. They deal very well with heavy infantry that doesn't have an invulnerable save, right? So Storm Guardians have no specialization at all. They're not good at anything in particular. They don't really deal well with light infantry because they don't have the volume of attacks required like Swooping Hawks or Warp Spider units. And they really don't have the tank killing potential with their Guardian fusion guns that Fire Dragons have, right? So they're not really in a good space against anything. They can do a little bit of everything, but very poorly, and they don't support other units that well because of it. Also, Storm Guardians require ample support themselves, often needing huge point investments that is much better saved for more important units like Howling Banshees and Fire Dragons. Why would I spend 145 points on a Wave Serpent, right, for a unit of Storm Guardians that does not have the damage potential of either of those units, right? So they either need huge point investments or they need command point investments from the start of the game. And to be honest with you, there's not a lot of room for that, especially now with the new changes to command points. So these guys are just really hard to justify taking in almost any kind of list because not only do they not support your aspect warriors very well, but they also require huge investments to use. They're not a unit that can sustain by itself and kind of do its own thing like Guardian Defenders can or Rangers can. They really need a lot of support to work well, and to be honest, in most cases, no one's going to want to do that. Now, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I've told you guys in previous videos that I actually have a friend who really loves Storm Guardians. We've kind of been friends for years, and he plays Uthway. It's funny because he's actually been playing since high school with me, but he loves Storm Guardians. I don't know why. He just likes them. And even though they're not great, he runs them in most of his games, and it's a running joke amongst our group that they never survive to the end. It's kind of like, I don't know if any of you have ever seen South Park, but it's kind of like Kenny dies in every episode, right? Well, that's his Storm Guardians. That's the joke we have for him. They're the Kenny of his army. So I noticed, though, that my friend only runs one unit of them. And he just runs them because he likes them, but he absolutely thinks they suck as well. But the reason why actually got me thinking a little bit about, maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel for this unit. Because this unit wasn't always that bad. In previous editions, for example, when he used to run them in 5th edition, they used to be decent at taking out stuff like tactical space marines and stuff like that. Shooting units that weren't really meant for close combat, right? Now, with the changes, the Storm Guardians became much worse because tactical marines and stuff became much better units, and Storm Guardians just weren't able to get through the armor anymore. But I've found that just like units from other armies, tactical squads, Cavalite warrior units, Imperial Guardsmen, etc., that even though Storm Guardians don't support our specialized units in any way whatsoever, they actually do a very good, decent job at supporting other units of Storm Guardians. Wait, hold on, Proxyham. Are you telling me that this unit is so bad that no one takes even just one unit of them, but you're suggesting that people take multiple units of these just so they can be effective at supporting each other? And honestly, I originally ran a couple of units. I actually ran 3 units just for a fun kind of thing, as kind of a joke. And I put 2 to 3 units in Strategic Reserve. I actually put 3 units in Strategic Reserve, but you could put 2 or 3 units. And I used them as a unified force. And actually, these guys came in on a flank that my opponent wasn't really expecting, and they performed very well. Now, the reason why these performed well is because my opponent really didn't take them seriously as a threat. We're always joking about Storm Guardians, and he's played my friend several times, and the Storm Guardians always die and end up doing nothing. So he figured this was going to be the same thing. You know, I kind of made it a running joke that the Storm Guardian units were just for fun and so forth. So basically what happened was he got sloppy with his movement, and he decided that he wasn't going to really respond to protecting his own flanks. So what happened is the Storm Guardians came in, 3 units of them. He had a Redemptor Dreadnought on the flank, which he was trying to use to get line of sight on some of my more vulnerable units in the backfield. And they actually successfully, absolutely wrecked that Redemptor Dreadnought. And they went on to tie up several other units in close combat. They captured an objective on that flank. And essentially, he realized that he had nothing in the area to stop them. Now, I'm not saying that this strategy can work all the time. I think that there are several armies that this strategy is not going to be good against. But I noticed that the Storm Guardians actually did fairly well at supporting each other when kept in a tight group. It did cost a decent amount of points. It was about a 300-point investment. It did also cost a couple of command points for my Strategic Reserve. I was using a list with a webway portal though, so they only cost, I think they cost only 1 command point when you have a webway portal, I believe. So they didn't really cost that much in that department, but to be honest with you, they actually performed beyond my expectations. And this got me thinking that maybe running a couple squads of Storm Guardians in reserve wouldn't be that bad of an idea. So for example, if you didn't have a webway portal, you could just run 2 units. It only costs 1 command point to put them in Strategic Reserve, and they can threaten a flank fairly well. They can be given 4 fusion guns and 4 flamers. So this basically allows them to come from reserve, and if something is on the flanks, they can quickly engage that unit and do some serious damage to it. Now, again, this is going to be very reliant on your opponent not really taking the Storm Guardian seriously. But I think that Storm Guardians might just be effective when run together as several units supporting each other, just like units from other armies. So the reasoning behind this is that when you fight a Space Marine player or an Imperial Guard player, they're going to have several units of the same type in small groups, small clusters supporting each other. And what that does is that provides them with the ability to have enough anti-tank weapons, enough anti-heavy infantry, or whatever they have in that area to deal with a lot of different threats. They support each other, right? So you have a couple, 3-4 Space Marine units supporting each other. They're probably going to have, 4 plasma guns, maybe some heavy bolters or, last cannons or whatever other anti-tank or anti-infantry options they have, but they're going to be supporting each other and being effective as a group. And Storm Guardians can do exactly the same thing. So another reason why, to be honest with you, I don't think Storm Guardians are that popular with Eldar players is because we have trained our minds to think in a very Eldar way, right? We have a lot of specialized units in our army. In fact, almost every single one of our units is a specialist of some kind. And what we do instead is we take groups of specialist units that work with each other very well. But the thing about Storm Guardians is, again, they don't work with other specialist units well because they're a generalist unit, right? So they don't work well with specialized units. What they do work well with, though, is other generalist units in a larger group. And I still don't think Storm Guardians are good. I still think they need improvements before they can actually become a decent unit and a competitive unit. They do need some changes. But I believe that if we start thinking of them less as a support to our specialist units and as a unit, as a generalist unit that is good with other generalist units, which, to be honest with you, is really only other Storm Guardians, then we can start to see some possible potential for this unit. Now, again, I'm not going to sit here and argue that Storm Guardians are competitive when used in this way, because again, the game that I played is probably not indicative of anything that's reliable, right? Again, my opponent didn't really take it seriously. Yes, they did destroy a Redemptor Dreadnought and they did a lot of damage to other units, but he wasn't prepared for it at all. And to be fair, he didn't really think that they were going to be as much of a threat as they were in the later turns of the game. I did bring them in on turn 3, and at that point, he didn't have a lot of tools to deal with them. So, in essence, I think that yes, Storm Guardians could be effective, but for them to start being effective, we have to kind of rethink the role that Storm Guardians play and how they're used in our games. So in conclusion, Storm Guardians are a generalist unit that does a little bit of everything kind of poorly, right? And it often underperforms when taken as a single unit in a support role. So just like Space Marine tactical squads, a single Space Marine tactical squad, even though it's pretty tough, their firepower is nothing to, when it's alone, is nothing to really write home about, right? And same thing with Storm Guardians. Their damage as a single unit is really very poor because honestly, they're even worse than tactical Marines, right? They have less threat range, they have a lot of, less toughness, less armor, etc. But even though they don't really add much to any of our own specialized units, which puts them in a really weird spot in a highly specialized army, they can support each other decently well and pose a significant threat when used together in flanking actions or from things like strategic reserve, where they can take your opponent by surprise and capture objectives that your opponent didn't really expect them to capture. Because again, Storm Guardians are a little bit of a meme. A lot of players know that Storm Guardians kind of suck, and when they see them, they often underestimate them. However, just a quick disclaimer for everybody out there. I still don't think Storm Guardians are that good, and I definitely don't think they're an optimal unit to use in a vast majority of builds out there. So, buyer beware. Don't come back to my channel and say, Proxy Hammer, I got tabled because you told me to use Storm Guardians in big, large numbers. I don't take responsibility for that. To be honest with you, I think that if I was going up against another army besides Space Marines, like Tyranid or Tau, I think I would have had a lot more trouble with these guys, to be honest with you. And I probably would have gotten crushed myself. So, again, I think these guys have a lot of bad matchups, and obviously, like I said, they're not an optimal unit, but they do certainly work better together in multiple units supporting each other than they do supporting other more specialized units like Howling Banshees, Striking Scorpions, Fire Dragons, Dire Avengers, etc. Alright everybody, that's it for today's video on Storm Guardians, my absolute favorite unit. Have a good one, peace out, and I'll see you guys in the next video.